What's going on, everybody? Good evening. We are switching things up and doing something just a little bit different with this video. I haven't done one of these in a while, but I do like to do video reviews of video games that I play through shortly after release. So we are going to be doing another one of those today for this game because this was a game I put a lot of time and effort into. It's been a while since I put this much into any video game, much less a new game. So I definitely want to talk about it. And I say that knowing that most people have already played through this game and beaten it. And to a certain extent, it's already kind of become old news. It did win a lot of Game of the Year awards, so it's not like it passed through the zeitgeist and nobody cares about it anymore in the way that, say, Starfield passed through the zeitgeist and no one cares about it anymore. But this is definitely a game that most people beat well before I did. It took me a while to get through this one. I was taking my time. I had to stop a few times to do other things for a little while. I wasn't able to go through it as fast as I wanted to. Things just kept getting in the way. But as of early this morning, actually, I have finally beaten this game. Metaphor ReFantazio. Metaphor ReFantazio. Beat it early this morning. And we're talking at least 120 hours of gameplay. And if you include deaths and losing progress, because when you die, you have to go back a little bit, and having to just reset a couple of times and time researching stuff, you're probably looking at 130 hours pretty easily, I would say. So that's a lot to put into a game. I think the last time I put that into one game was probably Persona 5 Royal. So this is every bit as involved as a Persona game, which should surprise nobody because it is basically a spiritual successor to Persona. But we're going to be reviewing this game today, but first let me tell you guys about my experience with games like this and games from this developer. This is my favorite kind of game. I love RPGs. I play RPGs all the time. I've been playing RPGs for over 20 years, coming up on 25 years, really. And they are my favorite kind of game. They are the kind of game that I really love putting dozens, if not hundreds of hours into. I was really excited for this game when it was announced because I wouldn't call myself a Persona veteran because I didn't play all the games on release, but I have become something of a Persona ombudsman in recent years. I played every mainline Persona game, and that includes 1, that includes Innocent Sin, that includes Eternal Punishment, and that includes, of course, 3, 4, 5 Royal, 5 Strikers. The only ones I haven't played that are actually in the Persona series are really the dancing games. So I am kind of a Persona expert at this point, and this game was billed as Persona in a high fantasy setting, made by the same people who make Persona, so I was very, very excited for this one. And I'm happy to announce that while I don't think it's as good as the best that Persona has to offer, it is still an excellent game. It is one of the best games in recent memory. I don't think it was the best game of the year, if only because Atlus released another game last year, Persona 3 Reload. Like, to me, that is the only reason why it's not Game of the Year for 2024. Again, I know that it's now 2025, and I know that Game of the Year stuff has mostly been settled, and the discussion on this game has kind of ended. People have played it and formed their own judgments. But for my money, it's not quite as good as the best that Persona has to offer, which would be what? Royal and Reload. But it is very close. It's better than some of the more primitive Persona games, I think. It's better than 4, it's better than the original 3, it's better than the original 5, certainly better than something like Strikers, and it represents what I would call as Persona's take on a Final Fantasy game. It feels like Hoshino looked at Final Fantasy and was like, I really like the aesthetics and vibes of the franchise, but I want to put my style of game into a Final Fantasy universe. And he did that, I think, very well. So, Metaphor ReFantazio, if you played Persona, you kind of know what you're getting into. If you played Final Fantasy, you know what the vibes are going to be like. That's basically what this game is. Now, when you're talking about a game like this, there's a certain balance that you're trying to strike, right? You have the combat elements and the non-combat elements for a game like this. And Persona leans pretty heavily into the non-combat elements. You have the social simulator, you have the dating simulator, you have the scheduling, you have the making decisions on how you're going to spend your time in the real world. And the combat actually becomes kind of a secondary element in its own game. The actual dungeon crawling, the boss fights, leveling up, going through fights, learning weaknesses, learning strengths, things like that. It all becomes kind of secondary to going through the universe of the game in a peaceful and almost, how should I put this? Almost kind of a peaceful way, in that you're just a student trying to make your way through life. You're trying to make friends, you're trying to do your homework, you're trying to work out, you're trying to become a better person, you're trying to do all these things in the game that have nothing to do with combat, that are basically just you making decisions on how you want to spend your time in the game. The time management elements. So, Metaphor, compared to Persona, leans more towards the gameplay. This game is more gameplay intensive than any of the Persona games, I think. The focus is on the job system. In this game, they call them archetypes, but it's the job system. You can give anybody any archetype at any point. Certain characters will be a better fit for certain jobs than others because of their inherent build. But it's the job system. It's the job system from Final Fantasy V, Final Fantasy Tactics, many other games. The job system's been ubiquitous for a while now. Final Fantasy X-2 had it. So that's basically the core of it, and it's pretty involved. When you compare it to the battle system in, Persona 4 or 5 or 3, with the demon, with the Persona capturing system or the demon negotiation system, it's a little bit more involved. It's a little bit more in line with SMT, actually. Shin Megami Tensei, you have a very similar approach to making making that balance work for you. So it's more focused on that. It's harder. It's harder to grasp. It's harder to understand how to maximize what you're getting out of your party. And I think overall you're going to spend more time in gameplay combat than you are compared to a Persona game as a percentage of the game. So they kind of stripped out a little bit of the social simulator element. It's certainly there. It is definitely there. This is not a Final Fantasy game where there's none of that. This is not a Shin Megami Tensei game where there's none of that. There's certainly social simulator elements. You choose how to spend your days, you choose how to spend your evenings, you hang out with people, you spend time upgrading your attributes, you spend time doing requests for people. It's just like Persona. But here's what I would say. The anxiety in the game is mostly gameplay oriented. And it's almost nothing in the social simulator element. I didn't use a guide really at all for this game when it came to the social simulator elements. I did it a little bit for the gameplay. That was mostly just to like double check weaknesses and things like that, so I didn't waste time. But for the most part, without even really trying to, I maximized every friendship. Let's just call them friendships. I maximized every friendship in the game with relative ease. With time to spare, I maximized every single friendship and relationship in the game. I maximized all your attributes. I did every request except for one that I didn't know was going to be there, and by the time I realized it was going to be there, it was too late. I would have easily had enough time to do it if I knew it was going to be there. So by the end of the game, I had free cycles where I had nothing else to do. I have never done that in a Persona game. Even when I've really tried, I have never once managed to maximize every single relationship in the game. But in this game, without even trying, I was able to do it with ease, so it felt like they brought it down a bit. And they wanted to minimize that a little bit and reduce the stress of that. Because in Persona, if you want to maximize all that, you have to be on the ball. You have to really get everything out of every opportunity, and you have to know what's coming. You have to know what opportunities are going to be cut off from you at some point so you can get on those things ASAP, or else you're going to end up with unfulfilled relationships by the end of the game. You're going to run out of time. In this game, I think it would be really hard to run out of time, especially because you don't get punished or rewarded for responses the same way you do in Persona. So overall, they move the balance a little bit. And admittedly, I have grown so attached to the Persona formula that I think that the game suffers a tiny bit for that. I do. I'm just going to go ahead and admit that. I think that the game would have been better off maybe leaning the other way, but it fits. You're in a high fantasy setting. In Persona, you're a high school student. In this game, you're, well, I don't want to get too much into the exact details of the story. It's high fantasy. It's a custom high fantasy world, but you have elves, you have, well, you don't really have dwarves, but you have these fantasy races of people made up for this game, but there's basically a race that is like elves, you have basically a race that is like, the horned humans, and then you have just pure humans, you have fairies, you have like little creature species. It's basically like Lord of the Rings, but they, instead of doing dwarves, they do horned humans. Instead of this, they do that. It's very similar to Lord of the Rings in that capacity, and I think that um, it it fits, right? The circumstances are much more significant in game. Things are much more dire. You're not just a high school student that's been thrown into kind of this double life. Your whole life is trying to stay alive and trying to defeat this evil. And there's no element of you trying to do well in school or have a girlfriend or anything like that. So the whole game is basically just we're trying to defeat this evil. So it makes sense. I prefer the way Persona does things. I'm not going to knock this game for it, but I do think you could argue that the non-combat elements of this game are not as well done. They're not bad, not even close to being bad. There's a lot going on there that I think is good. What I would say, though, is that the strength of a Persona game is in its characters, and this game, the characters are good. They're fine. I don't have a problem with them. I like them, but they don't have the variety, they don't have the personality, they don't have the expression of a Persona cast. They are all a little bit stoic. Everybody seems somewhat similar. There are only a few moments where you catch hints of a more varied and complex personality, and that makes sense because of the setting, right? Like, one of the characters that you meet very early in the game who's in your party is a member of the Royal Guard. She should be stoic. She should take things seriously. She should have very few moments where she lets you see what kind of person she is deep down, because she's a member of the Royal Guard and she has to take things seriously. You have another character that you meet very early on who's a noble. He's going to be kind of a stiff person. He's not going to have the personality of your friends in other Persona games. So it makes sense, but if I had to say which one I think is better, I would say Persona, because that's kind of the seat of the power of the social link system in Persona games, or confidant system. You really want to get to know these people because they have such interesting and vibrant personalities, and the characters in this game are not as vibrant. So I think that that is a valid criticism of this game, because it is trying to cop those elements. It is trying to be very similar to that, and it just can't match it. It just can't get there because a lot of the characters feel very similar, and a lot of the characters feel very, well, I don't want to say uninteresting, but not as interesting. But that doesn't mean to say it's bad. And look, I love Shin Megami Tensei games. I thought Shin Megami Tensei 5 was a great game. So I don't have a problem with them leaning into gameplay, personally. And in some ways, this game made me think of a Shin Megami Tensei game, but the thing with Shin Megami Tensei is that it just tries to be a pure gameplay experience. It has very little story and almost no characters. Like, you look at something like even Shin Megami Tensei 5, which came out 4 years ago, that game has almost nothing in the realm of characters, and the story barely exists because it's just trying to deliver a gameplay experience. And what they do to kind of cover that up is to say, okay, we're going to make the whole game's story and plot developments feel like kind of like a dream. Everybody's kind of like in a fugue state almost. And we're going to really try to make that atmosphere so it almost feels like SMT games try to make the situation feel so dour and dire and desperate and bad and negative that it's almost like you don't really want to be in the story of the game because everything just is bad. Everything's bad. That's not what's quite going on in this game. Maybe more so than a Persona game, but it's still, you spend dozens of hours in the story of this game and learning these characters, learning about them. It's not the same as when they're excellent characters, like in a game like Persona 4, which I think has the best cast of the franchise. This game is spending almost that much time on it without having characters that are as good, or I would say a story that's as good. I like the story. Story's basically, and I'm not spoiling anything because this happens very early, the king of the kingdom dies, and everyone's trying to figure out how to decide who the king's successor will be, and the whole game is basically about trying to determine who's going to be the new king. The theme of the game is basically prejudice and racism and intolerance and stuff like that. So all that stuff is a really good. I don't think it's as good as the story of something like Persona 3. That is the best story of the franchise. So the gameplay is not as good as Shin Megami Tensei, although it is very good, and the story and characters are not as good as Persona. So it's kind of stuck in the middle. I do think it's probably a better overall experience than Shin Megami Tensei because the story is still really good, and I appreciate the non-combat elements, even though I don't think they're as good as other similar games. But it's I think you guys see what I'm getting at here. It just leaves something a little bit on the table by trying to like be in the middle. Like Hogwarts Legacy was kind of a good example of this to me. Although Hogwarts Legacy is nowhere near as good as Metaphor. Metaphor was a much better game. Hogwarts Legacy was trying to be part FromSoft, Soulsborne type game and part BioWare game, and I think it would have benefited from committing one way or the other. This game's trying to be part SMT and part Persona. I think it would have benefited from maybe trying to commit to one or the other. Either be a pure gameplay experience with very little story and character, or lean into the story and character stuff a little bit more. Find a way to make it more compelling, even though it's in that high fantasy setting, and deprioritize the gameplay the same way you did in something like Persona 5 Royal. And Persona 5 Royal was a really easy game. It is one of the best games ever, but it is also a phenomenally easy game to play. They give you every opportunity to breeze through that game if you know what you're doing. So this game was much harder than that. And I welcome that. I played the game on hard. I played the whole game on hard, which I was proud of. By the way, another one criticism I have of this game, whoever made that final boss, like slow down, dude. That was so... I had people tell me it was as bad as Nyx in Persona 3, the original. That was so much worse than Nyx. Nyx was just long. This was long, and I don't know if I was doing something wrong. I don't know if I had my party build out, but this wasn't just long. This was every single turn you're crossing your fingers that you hit your dodge. Every single turn you're hoping you're crossing your fingers that he doesn't use the set of moves that you know are going to make you have to go back 2 hours. So that final boss was ridiculous, and I do think it actually takes away from the game a little bit. Like, cool your jets a little bit. Like, I was over leveled, and I still survived by luck about half a dozen times. But it's an excellent game. There's a lot to like here. I hope they continue on with it, even though I think I would have preferred leaning a little bit more one way or the other when it came to that gameplay versus non-gameplay balance. So I'd give it like a 9.5 out of 10, 9.4 out of 10, something like that. That's what I would give it out of 10. See you guys later. Let me know what you guys think about Metaphor ReFantazio. My whole gameplay playthrough, which is going to be probably over 50 parts, maybe 60, will be uploaded on my Twitch VOD channel. I'm only like 24, 25 parts in, so it's going to be a little while before all the parts are up, but you can still watch most of it over on my Twitch channel as well. Most of the VODs are still up. So if you want to check that out, go ahead. It's a very long playthrough. I don't expect a lot of people to be like fully invested in it. Again, the playthrough parts themselves might push 140 hours, really. So excellent game. Keep it up, Atlus. Excited for Persona 6. Excited for the Persona 4 reboot that we all know is or remake that we all know is going to happen. And thank you for watching. I will see you guys later. And I don't know when my next new video game review is going to be, but something's going to come out that I review. So see you guys then.